have a seat, we will continue with this afternoon session.
Continuando con el programa.
Continuing with our program, and we hope you have enjoyed your lunch. We will start with session number 3. In this session, we will have the Executive Secretary of CIECAP, Panama, Mrs. Elizabeth Puig, and she's going to be moderating session number 3 regarding pension products, design and mechanisms to face the needs of investment, of saving. We also have Mr. Sanchez from the Superintendency of Banca from Peru. And we will also have Pablo Antolin, economist of the pension unit of OCDE. In a couple of minutes, we will also have in our panel Mr. Gonzalo Edwards from Chile. He's an academic from the Catholic University, an expert regarding prevention. We will also have time at the end of the session for Q&A. Good afternoon. I would like to take this opportunity to be the moderator of this session, to thank the Aios for having this event and all the attention and the warm welcome we will have during these days. I think it is a good opportunity to talk about the title, which is Challenge for Individual Prevention Systems. This is something that is very important to discuss because many countries are currently facing crisis for solidarity systems because we have voluntary pensions and complementary systems, and in other countries where we still have the social security as a solidarity system. And all systems have to introduce some modifications. So I think that this is a very good title, as I said before. The idea is to talk about pension products regarding two different factors that are affecting social security: the increase of longevity of life expectancy and the low coverage. We have 3 excellent members of this panel today, experts in the subject matter, and I think we're going to be learning a lot from their experiences. We have Pablo Antolin. He's Chief Executive of the pension units in OCDE. We also have Gonzalo Edwards. He is a scholar and a university professor at the Catholic University in Chile. And we also have Elio Sanchez. He's a superintendent in Banca Seguros, Peru. Without any further delay, I would like to start with the presentation of Mr. Pablo for you to talk about this particular matter.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming to listen to us. Thanks, Elizabeth, for introducing, and thanks for everyone to inviting me to join this seminar. I was asked to talk about annuities, and now talk about what is happening in the last 2 years, the annuities and their guarantees of different products of lifelong pensions. Lifelong pensions are important to analyze because they are necessary to channel the savings accrued to financing the retirement. Overall, the defined contribution plans, such as what happens in many countries of Latin America. Their financing or their pension systems is based in this kind of plans. OECD recommends their roadmap for the good design of DC pension plans to buy part of the assets, accrued assets, to buy lifelong pensions for individuals to be covered or warranted against longevity risks. There is the risk to survive to the resources available in the pension. If we need lifelong pensions, then we have to learn with the experience of the countries. We have been studying what happened in different countries and try to understand the advantages and disadvantages to reach recommendations and suggestions for economic policy. We have into account that individuals want lifelong pensions, but not what they consider as a traditional pension, but they want to have guarantees. But evidently, the more guarantees, this will have effects on the costs of the pensions, and this will impact the management of these risks. Considering all of that, we began a study at OCDE about the kinds of lifelong pensions. And in this study, at first we realized what happens in the different countries, that we should begin from the basics. We should begin from an agreement for the different countries about what is a lifelong pension product. Then we had to study different kinds of lifelong pensions, which could have different names in the countries. It was necessary to understand the characteristics rather than the names, because these change. Evidently, what were the risks presented by this product and how they could be managed. Factors which determine the availability, design, and sustainability of the products in the different countries. Why some countries have some products and others have other kind of products. Some countries have one product and others have different kinds of product. It was necessary to understand this and to suggest what kind of reform should countries conduct to have a wide variety of lifelong pensions or a better management of risks. And it was necessary to understand what exists in each country. We had to take into account that all these products aimed at providing a service to the consumers, the retired. Therefore, those products should be appropriate to those individuals because it was aimed at them.
That's why we're building these pension schemes or systems, as we discussed earlier on this morning. And we finished this work within OECD with considerations about policies and talking about what things we should be doing, always taking into account the different objectives, the different countries, the different regulatory bodies, because of course we will always have different recommendations for them. Now I would like to continue and talk about different aspects. I won't be able to go into depth about the work that we have in OECD. We're going to talk about that further on in the workshops. If any of you is interested in some of the details that I'm not going to review now, we have all the documentation available. We can send it to you, and we would be more than delighted to send it to you. So please send us your comments, your critics, in order for us to improve our work. What is a lifelong pension product? That is a question that we have to ask ourselves, because each country speaks a different language. In general, this is a product that will allow a flow of payments, regular payments. That is the basic concept. But these systems, regarding the distribution or capitalization, they offer the affiliates a regular payment, a flow of regular payment. They are not a product, or sometimes they are not considered a product, but they are lifelong annuities. So should we incorporate this in the different policies to be adopted? That is a topic that we discussed. What about the longevity risk? This is another topic that is very important when it comes to lifelong pensions. So we have to see whether they are inside the framework of study. The program withdrawals are also, the drawdown programs are also included in England. They are starting to become a product that, based on the freedom of choice that they have established, they are starting to grow a lot in the market. So the lifelong pensions are dropping. And then we have variables. In the United States, we have very important cases, and they are a very important part of the market. And even though, despite being a regular flow of payments, the amounts are not regulated. So even though it's an intelligent product, sometimes for the individual, there are products in the United States that, when you start through accumulation, evaluating when the time comes to retire, you can decide whether this is going to be a lifelong pension or not. So we should be analyzing all the discussions that we have at OECD. And after having these discussions, we understood that without having a clear framework, it would be very difficult to continue with the study. So at the end of the day, we realized that we needed to have more clearer definitions in order to avoid having terminology problems, in order to know that when you sit at a table to discuss these topics, we speak the same language. What are the criteria? The environment is very important. A product that was discussed with the different regulators. An annuity program has to be financed wholly through the contributions or the primes that are used. The payments are determined based on calculus, fair calculus, not based on promises. For example, the occupational programs that we have in Switzerland, they are out of scope. The provider of RV, these annuities programs, are an entity that promises payments to the individual or to the affiliate. So bulk annuities are out of this study. The employer cannot be the guarantee of said or promised payments, which means that the cash balance or book reserve plans are also out of the scope of this study. This is just for you to know what kind of products we're talking about and which ones we're going to be analyzing. Talking about definition, there is a component of longevity insurance. Program withdrawals are out of the scope. When is it going to be optional to receive a regular flow of payment in the future? This has to be defined right at the beginning when you establish a contract, not later on. This will be eliminating the Belgium occupational plans. When is it mandatory to define a program of a flow of regular payment? This has to be also specified in the same contract established for the accumulation of assets. So the contract has to be available at both stages. The register plans in Germany for individual accounts are considered, but the annuities that not the warranties that are currently used in the United Kingdom are not included. We have immediate characteristics. We have those that have a regular prime, a unique prime, individuality. We have them in group. We have guarantees. We have options when they can withdraw investment funds. We also determine the level of the annuity, when they're going to be receiving this amount, and at different levels. We have all this, we take all this into account in the study to establish certain standards for all the countries within the OECD. This is the second point in our presentation. What kinds of different annuities there are? These groups are divided in three, basically. Annuities which have a predefined payment. The provider of the annuity is exposed to the risk associated to longevity and investments, and the kinds of products are level or de-escalating annuities, advanced life deferred annuities, and the last two, joint and enhanced.
Enhanced annuity.
The second group, in this case, payments are indexed and they vary, but they vary according to an index. Always, they vary, but they are always doing that based on an index, and this allows the provider and the client to share the risk of longevity. Also here I have listed a list of products and type of products.
Luego están
They're in the third group, which the products with withdrawn with the guaranteed income option. Individuals have access to a capital and have the future option to receive annuity at a conversion rate, a guarantee rate. The provider of this product is exposed to the risk of the individual's behavior because he can make another decision. Then the behavioral risk is important in addition to the risks of longevity and investment. The kinds of products are numerous. Then we have all these kinds in United States. If someone is interested, we can talk about it. And then we have a table of the most common annuity product by jurisdiction. These are the most typical ones. This is available. And the third point that I'm talking about, it's the risk presented by the annuity products and how can they be managed. Then the third aspect of the study. The main factors that determine the risks are the product design, underwriting risk, risk-sharing features, guarantee formula, the consumer options, the future exposure, longevity risk, interest rate risk, equity risk, consumer behavior. All this is well known by many of you. The important is how to manage those risks. And then we have a whole study in which we explain how to manage those risks by the insurance companies. I can talk about it. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, but something went wrong. for the different kinds of annuities, as I was talking, with fixed payments, indexed payments, with withdrawn with the option for buying. If I begin to talk about these issues, I won't stop in the next 20 minutes. And then, as I said before, we have all the documents, all the discussion. If someone is interested, we'll be more than delighted to make it available. Please send us the comments or criticisms so we can improve it. This is the presentation summary of what we have discussed in the different kinds of annuity. The fourth point of the study, which factors determine the availability, design, and sustainability of the annuity products. The design of the products, it's important too because it determines the opportunities for these products. And what is crucial here is how the pension system is structured in each country. All countries of OECD have accrual systems that define benefits. The only thing that changes in the countries, it's the wave of each component, but every country has one or different waves. What is the pension system structure? What will determine the wave of these products? In a European country where the pension system provides pensions, the annuity product system will be very limited. It's not relevant.
It is also important to consider the individual demand. There is a more flexible demand, an increased demand for value and the perception of that value that creates problems, and the sustainability of these products as well, whether they are feasible in the long term. Because we're talking about something that is going to be affecting how we pay in the next 20 or 30 years. So that's why it's also very important. So discussing the role, the need for guarantees that other sources of pension include. It is also very important to take into account that these different social economic groups rely more or less on the distribution system, on the safety net, or the defined contribution system. So it's very important to take all this into account because the differences are very, very relevant for the different countries, members of the OECD. It also depends on the regulation on the different jurisdictions. For example, there are limits on the amount of money they are able to withdraw. They are called ALDAs. In many countries, there is no mandatory limits. This morning, we talk about tax encouraging systems. What restrictions we have regarding design. There are segmentations, for example, for gender, for example. This is all important to take into account in order to understand the importance and the role of each product. The required warranties, for example, the ones that are indexed according to inflation. In other countries, this only creates differences. So the existing rules must encourage and promote the role of the available products we have for annuities. The demand, as I said earlier on, individuals consider the traditional annuities not to be flexible. The perceived value is very low. In fact, we talk about the annuity puzzle that we try to explain to them, but the reality is that people do not buy that. The innovative products, different products that traditional annuities have, increasing the rentability and also increasing the cost. So we have two faces of the same coin. There are always trade-offs. They enable the participation in the market, the access in the subjects and capital available, and they may, of course, increase the management risks involved, whether they are systemically safest or not. Many insurance companies are even selling their variable annuities systems because this is very, very complex because of the management, the risk management. And now having regulatory bodies, they have to invest even more money in reserve forms because of the management of these risks. Innovative products, the profit sharing also reduces the protection. We don't say that they are good or bad, but we have to be aware of this. The smoothing or complex problems, which may end up in problems of transparency, the balance between cost and benefit. So here we have some trade-offs which will always exist and we have to take into account. So when we see all these products in the different markets, this is the trade-off that explains the existence of different products in the different countries.
Therefore, regarding the sustainability, there is a framework for accountable standards. How do we calculate the profit sharing, the risk management strategies, the information standards, disclosure regarding the derivatives and exposition, the effectivity of the risk management. To define the coverage strategies, we must take into account the counterpart risk, the request of reserve and solvency. I have just talked about it. The principle-based approach could be adapted to the product innovation. Internal models allow a large flexibility above the cost of reducing the comparability. I'm not talking about what is good and bad. I'm talking that there is always a trade-off between those sides of the coin. We must take into account we want to have a coin which we don't like the rose, the face. So there are required proper strategies for risk management, and which should facilitate and promote proper risk management strategies. The fifth point, make sure that there are proper products for the consumers. We must take into account the consumer's point of view. How do we look at it? We talk about consumer protection. There must be a conscience of awareness of the product. They should know about the different products available. In many countries, they don't know which products are available, and one must decide based on the received information how those products are distributed in the different countries. As we all know, there are different forms of distribution in Chile, England, United States. Products should be presented in a clear way in order to determine the product disclosure, the transparency and comprehension about the product should be made clear also. We have all those items discussed without further details. I don't have the entire session just for me. Then I go to the last point, considerations on political considerations regarding the annuity products. That's what we are going to discuss in June in the work part pensions. But the main messages could be summarized in this slide. This is a summary of what I have talked about. There is a need to define a common language and a standard terminology more than anything to speak about the same things. It must be distinguished, the annuity and annuity product. Pension product and annuity product should be distinguished. To define a common terminology is crucial to collect data which should conduct policy discussions. Then must have the same terms for the same things, otherwise it should be impossible to discuss them. We should design a consistent framework. The pension system required to accommodate and facilitate the role of annuities. The framework should be consistent to facilitate and accommodate the role of annuity and should allow the risk management and cost management. We need an innovation process. We should guarantee the sustainability and coherence of the annuity product in a framework, in a constant changing process.
So we don't have a fixed framework. It is always flowing from one model to another. It is also important to foster proper risk management, to align the measures for risk management and how to manage this. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Pablo. It was very interesting, the topic that you have developed. This topic about annuities, I think that you mentioned two big factors. First of all, that we have to unify, even though each country may have its own regulation on this body. Now we know that it's incorporated in the insurance companies, who are the ones that regulate this product. They have come into the prevision system for the affiliate in order to be able to opt for these annuities as a pension system. And I think that you nailed it very well when you mentioned that it is very important to unify the language that we speak of in order to be useful as a true product for our objective for pensions. So thank you very much. Thank you for your input. And now we're going to listen to Professor Gonzalo Edwards, who is also going to talk about the annuities.
Thank you. My study is much less complex.
My presentation won't go into so much detail, and I will make the most of the fact that you're still here, so you cannot run away. I would like to summarize what that as a near future. So that's lack of consistency in terms of how we perceive time, right? Because we should be able to say, oh, when we have to talk about the future, that is so far away. But let's use this example. I wanted to put some shorts and some funny hat, but then I thought they will be able to understand that I am 60 and not 30, so I didn't want to change the character. So let's suppose that this is 1981 and I am 30 years old. I will have 65. I will be 65 at the beginning of 2016. So far, I have not contributed ever. This is my annual salary, 1,200, and with my monthly wage, and my monthly wage is about 100. So let's suppose that the rentability will be about 5% as an average, profitable, and when I have to hire an annuity, by the time I retire, will be about 4%. And according to the regular standards, I will be dead by 85, when I am 85. So I am used each year from now until I retire. It may even increase, and it will be 7% higher than my current salary. Great. Would it still be a good number when I retire? The 101 implies a retirement rate of 54.58%. So if you see here, we are supposing that the salary will be increased from 100 to 196.07. So it might look good today in this year, 1981, but it won't be that good when the 2016 comes. Even though back then I consider it a good number. So 2016 is here. I am the same. 35 years later, I am 65 and I am about to retire. Luckily, my funds have a profitability of 6.8 instead of 5. And therefore, I have around 45% more than what I was expecting. Now, if this was the only thing that really happened in these 35 years, then maybe I could have a pension of 154.79, which means a replacement rate of 78.79. That would be very good. But luckily enough, the profitability of the fund was even better. Nowadays, the sale rate is not 4, but it's 2.7. That's the average of the last quarters in Chile. So as a result, my pension would be 154. So it means that I would have to be 138%. Well, we're still good. But I had forgotten that in the meantime, the tables or the indexes, which are dynamic nowadays, have been changed a lot, as Pablo may know. But that's fine. With the current table, with the annual table of annuity in 2014, I will not have the amount that I expected. So as you can see, in these 35 years, I had a 4% sale rate. The AFP gave me a 5%, and the mortality rate back then was a different one. So to a better profitability, here we have the minimum and the maximum numbers that I was managing. And as you can see, then my table went down from 78.94 to 70.6. So my annuity was less, and I have contributed every month, not like most of my friends.
Now present my son. To have 30 years old, following his story and what he thinks today. I have 30 years old, the same. They'll have 65 to 2051. It's not that far. I haven't contributed, never. I suppose that the profitability of the PFA will be 30.5 and that the sale rate will be 2.7 when I retire. I will die according to the official mortality rate, just like my father when he contributed to his annuity. My annual wage is 1,020. I'll have an annuity of 61. If I could think profitability of 5%, my annuity will be 81. With the profitability of my father, I'll have an annuity of 117. My pension is the half of his. If the improvement factors of the table keeps stable, we'll have, unlike my father, which has a life expectancy of 20.34 years, I'll have a life expectancy of 23.74 years. I should expect a pension of 53, which is lower than what my father received. They suggest me to contribute 15% before the 70s. If I contribute until the 70s, I will have an 56% over my salary. Obviously, I won't have any gaps. I wish I started to contribute before. in my case, my replacement tax will be lower than with my pension, which was exclusively mine. Times have changed and interest rates have lowered strongly, and funds don't grow as before. That's why put a tree which grows in 2,000 years and the pine grows in 30 years. At the end, we thought we would grow as the pine, and we grew as the other tree, which is very nice but grows very slowly. At the retirement moment, this horizon is even more far away. In 1981, a 65-year-old man hoped to live to the 82 years. Now they live more. The solution is not to return to the old systems and use the accrued funds. We must have a more sustainable pension system so the funds won't finish. Thank you very much.
Bueno, para finalizar,
Well, in order to finish this panel, we'll listen to Helio Sanchez Chavez.
y bueno, un pequeño
As a short comment, according to your point of view and your experience, you have your particular elements, of course, but I believe that it's also valid to listen to all of these different point of view, because this enable us to form criteria of what can be good or not that good in the short term, in medium term. So thank you very much for your input. Good afternoon. I would like to thank for the invitation. My presentation is especially addressed to sharing the recent experience we have had regarding pension products and their acceptance from the current retired population. We have this fourth segment in my presentation. The first one that I will go very briefly have to do with the structural aspects and features about the Peruvian model. And then we will see the recent measures and challenges that we still need to face. As you may know, in our country, we are going through a structural process of change, which is not yet completely finished, but we have started to work very aggressively with the operational design. Very briefly, the work market has improved. We have 40% of labor who is self-employed in companies that are micro companies or informal companies. We have a total of 20 to 25% of affiliated who are affiliated to a particular system, but they are contributing within a 20 and 25%. We also have a non-contributive base or foundation or pillar, and in this particular pillar there is a coexistence with the private system and the public system. So a person, an individual, can only be part of one of the system. They can either choose to go to the private or to the public. They are not able to participate or be affiliated in both. So both systems do compete in order to attract affiliates. And we also have special benefits like the state guarantee for the different kinds of pensions. This has to do with the labor market. The challenge is the coverage. We are very uneasy. We are trying to see how we can expand this coverage. We have to go through a complete reform. And the problem are the young people. The average people in our country. Our country is a very young country, but it's going to start to be critical over the next decades. The system started in June 1993. We started operating. We're going to be 23 years old. We have 6 million affiliates. The total number of contributors is 2.5 million of workers, which represent 20% of the GDP, with an average annuity of 7.5%. We have 4 PFAs with a system of commissions. Back in 2013, we have a mixed commission. A mixed commission that has to do with a percentage over your salary and a percentage over the employer contribution. So we are within this universe of commissions. We have been advancing in Peru. Every year we incorporate 250,000 people every year. If you can see the red line here, the number of affiliates that are dependent had to do with the recent change in 2014. This has been stabilized. Why? Because we have a new PFA in the market, the result of a tendering system very similar to the Chilean one. We have 3 different types of funds, and happily fund number 1, which is the more conservative one, has been the axis that has enabled us to give the future retired population, to promise them a more stable future. Our results are always with a tendency to go down. If you can see, we also have a very good rent profitability. This has enabled us to have some stability and with a good perspective towards the future, calling for new bids. And when we talk about pension system, this is still a young system, 23 years old, so it does not yet cover a whole work cycle, if you like. Right now we have 89,000 retired individuals, and the projections have been increasing, as you can see in this graph. The average pension is higher compared to the private system. They have a maximum of about over 800 soles. However, this topic that I wanted to share with you is that in Peru we have a very wide offer for pension products. Here are the basic models: the program retirement, a temporal rent with an annuity that's going to be paid in different installments, and the annuities, the lifelong annuities. Taking into account the framework that Pablo Antolin mentioned earlier on at the beginning, in our case, you will see this kind of products. The lifelong annuities can be offered in different kinds. We have indexed soles, and then we also have a 2% annual rate adjusted soles. The government didn't want to issue instruments indexed according to inflation. That's why the demand has been adjusted to 2%. We also have pensions in dollars. These are nominal dollars to a rate of 2% annual. We also have mixed annuities. We have also a system of lifelong annuity in dollars, or a mixed one with dollars and soles. So the retired person will receive at the same time an annuity, a lifelong annuity, and a program, and a private program annuity. So if you think this is a wide offer, in the past we have even wider programs that consider protection to the spouses. We tried to reduce the offer. Why dollars? Because this was a product in Peru. We have a lot of instruments in dollars, and that will enable the insurance companies to meet their obligations in the long run. From all these products, the most popular one, the clear preference is the temporary rent, the temporary annuity, with a 64%. And within it, we have a specific one with a deferred payment in 2 years. In the past, we have this lifelong annuity with a 50% of payment already program. We have established up to 2 years. But as we were developing the market, we realized that there were specific needs of the retired people, and we wanted to have more flexibility, and we have also a challenge associated to longevity. So pensions have been increasing. At the beginning in 1995, out of the total, we have a 40% of anticipated, apart from the ordinary ones, in which there was a combination of situations of unemployment. So the Congress decided to modify this, and we have implemented a 40%.
They are financed 40% for the recognition of work who belong to the public servant now which had contributed at the moment of reform. He could go to the private system with a recognition of what had contributed to the public system. In average, 40% of the pensions are recognized. Some workers are not recognized for their contribution because they don't comply with the requirements. This is a consideration I will have later, but the average of the pension in the private sector will be 60% higher than the public sector. Then we have criticisms that we have pensions for $30, $60. We are talking about 11% of the retired. Who are these These are persons who were at the public service but did not contribute, never contributed to the system. Affiliated to the private system, they wanted to retire without contributing to. And in the private sector, you receive what you have contributed. There are persons who are willing to accept this kind of pension, which helps to have a service, health insurance, and it allows to have a health coverage. That's the reason to have a low pension. We have some basic pensions which are received with the lowest level, 150 soles. We are talking about $50 approximately, but the persons would rather choose the private programmed withdrawal to increase it from 2 to 5 years. It had some risks, evidently, for a very conservative fund that the fund would be drawn down very fast, and the demand will be aimed at annuities for 5 years, because under the form of pension, retired could receive 5% of their fund, and then would receive an annuity in adjusted soles, 2% per year, could receive this protection. Nevertheless, I would make a comparison. From the prior situation, we have modality of pension, a different pension. The amount of annuities would be at 89%. It's almost 90%. When we introduced those changes, we saw that preference was not for 5 years, but to 3 years. Contributors wanted more flexibility in this issue. Then the preference aimed at the annuities for 3 years. There is a percentage you can see in this graph that 15% of the sales is aimed at 5 years, 34% is focused on this product, which has allowed a greater flexibility to the contributors. What additional measures have been taken? We have been exposed to the turbulence of the market, and when it gets the fluctuation over 2%, the contributor is informed about the risks and to know about what's happening regarding their pensions.
It is important to have in place some kind of counseling system for those individuals that are going to be retiring soon. We also plan to have a system for this kind of service, not to substitute or replace the PFAs. The idea is that if the potential retired person is not very happy, well, they can resource to the superintendency to ask any further questions, to complain about the service they are receiving or the explanations they have had, etc. So when the contribution was fluctuating, as I was mentioning before, maybe the amount was 356,000. Only for a few fluctuation in the amounts, we were receiving loads of complaints. So the idea is to provide a service to give proper advice about the different paperwork and the different steps that the person that is going to be retiring need to take. For those that are over 65%, there is an aggressive fund, but it is forbidden for this kind of people. And a very important topic, since we are talking about time, is the fact that the compulsory nature of being able to advance the payment. The problem is to exhaust the temporal feature in these 5 years. So for this mechanism, we have already formalized the advancement of this annuity. On April 1st, this month, Fund 0 has been established. The risk is in cash and in bank accounts. This is a transition fund. Of course, these are for retired people that want to be affected the less possible by the least variation. So this is a default. There is an option to move into fund type 1, which is a little bit more conservative. The fund of type number 2 is a more balanced one. Nowadays, most of them are within the type 1. We have a 5% that also opt to go to the more aggressive fund. And again, it is a transitional fund that applies to those that are requesting some kind of inability pension. So in order to see what are the challenges that we are facing, as you may know, the Congress is currently discussing a draft for a law that is going to take into consideration having a more flexible withdrawal program. And for that, we have already started working with a redesigned program, and we are also working on a new project for retirement, because it has to be a simple and friendly process for retiring person. We have a wide offer of products, so let's try to administer these products to minimize any impacts, not to have a choice overload for them, and of course to protect our workers. So we have to be able to create a combination evaluating the number of products, which is very wide. As I said, we also have pension systems that have a bonus program, so it makes it more complicated. And we have done what we call an ANT job, a very, very delicate job, in which we have provided counseling as well, in order to have a wide range of communication, of presence, either by the social networks, by the internet, by telephone, by email. Of course, everything would be recorded in order to have a proper monitorization or monitoring. In order to have control or monitor, not over in the insurance company, but also on the regulatory bodies, because sometimes the stakeholders might be confused with such a big amount of offers, of products. In our case, the information is activated when they are 64 years and 4 months old. And we are also working and analyzing the profile of our potential retired population in order to evaluate what are the needs they may have, and in order to reassign any design that we may have according to their specific needs. And of course, which are of course our main objective, our retiring population. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Elio. According to time issues, I would ask the floor to have any questions for the speakers. Yep.
They are getting the microphone. Fuera a buscar el micrófono.
Good afternoon. I was watching that almost all the forms analyzed were based in the decision of retiring or not, and definitely whether yes or not. But I have listened. I don't know if in that scenario the possibility of retiring gradually, but there is not at 65 a total retirement, but at 65 you could begin to retire gradually and to stop working 1 day a week, 2 days a week, and gradually quitting work. I believe this is a possibility for at least to financially proper for the employer and for the investor of the fund. Perhaps for the employer, should be a little trouble. But do you have analyzed this issue of progressive gradual retirement?
Pablo talked about that and also you. In Chile, what I have seen, I think that it's perfectly okay if someone starts working less hours a week to take some money off their wage in order to contribute. But I have seen that some people retire with the PFAs and they in fact continue to work and they continue to contribute. And in that case, you don't have to pay any other insurance. And then after that, they can also get another annuity with the rest of during the rest of their work life. But I think it would be interesting to explore what you have just suggested. The gradual or progressive retirement system has been discussed in many countries, talking about its distribution, and for the systems that have a predefined service, it has a considerable improvement for the employer because, of course, they are paying more, but the promise continues to be the same. However, in private systems of capitalization of individual accounts, the individual will receive the same pension understood as a value present, the net value present discounted of any future payments. Nothing will change. There will be higher because every month they will be paying more. And because they have been contributing for 4 or 5 years after 65, they have been withdrawing less money. So in the next coming years, this amount will be increased. But the amounts that are discounted from the flow do not change. But yes, there is an alternative. We are discussing it and we are talking about it. I think it's a very good idea, taking into consideration the longevity issues that we have right now.
Well, in the case of Peru, we don't explore that, but what we have done is with changes of anticipated retirement with a requirement of unemployment, 1 year of unemployment. If the person showed that which had not contributed for over 1 year for an unemployment reason, he could receive a pension. We had an option in 2010, which is anticipated pension regime. If a man from the 60 and the women from the 50 complies with that requirement, then the pension is higher to a minimum remuneration. It could apply for this anticipated. In other cases, it could apply for 50% of the pension funds. This possibility, it's been postergated 2 years more. It is old age protection. People who have withdrawn those 50% ended up without money, and they're waiting to have 65 to apply for the pension and to take the whole amount. This is the situation.
Maybe in order to clarify my question, I understand that the present value of the annuity is the same. However, it is deferred, delayed. So as long as the person agrees not to take that money, withdraw that money, if they are going to live for 5 more years and they have not withdrawn that money, that has an impact already. And I think that up to some point, it's a good practice because people seem to be resting, if you like. Some people sometimes even get sick because they are retired. So it could be an interesting thing to see if people are able to take this decision of being retired in a gradual way. and being able to make use of that pension in a gradual way, still receiving a salary from another source. I am not talking about anticipated retirement. I am talking a normal, a regular retirement, but being done in a progressive way, thinking about made in the long run. And also maybe thinking about incentives for people to do this in that way in order for the system to be more profitable.
What can be done and what portion it's to take annuity along with a defined annuity. Then we have more. The deferred one increases the pension from the moment from now on, and then they made it from the beginning. When one gets sick, when leaves work, it's sick because of the miss with the wife who stays at home with him.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Are there any other questions? Elio, I do have a doubt. You mentioned earlier on the different kinds of mixed pension retirements, having a combined system and a mixed system. What has been the experience for these pension funds, for these annuities in Peru? Thank you for your question. As I mentioned earlier on, we have pensions both in dollars and in soles. The product that was demanded the most was the one in soles. So those retired population that had pensions in pesos, in dollars, started to get worried because the rate of exchange has changed and has increased. So that we even have a syndicate, an association of retired people who were retiring with dollars that were worried about this rate of exchange change. So that's why we adjusted it to a 2%. And of that discussion, one of the results is to allow for the retired to have both currencies available in their pensions. One could be a lifelong in dollars, assuming the rate of exchange risks, and another one in soles, in which the person will assume the risk of investment. Only 44% of the total amount of our retired population has gone through this mixed offer. All our technicians and our executive power and everyone that is foreign to this subject said that this was a product that was not very successful, that we have to revise. And the thing is that our retired population don't want to take any risks. So they know that if they are going to have an annuity deferred up to 5 years, they know that they have a clear horizon, that the profitable rate will be, let's say, 2 or 5%. They already know that fixed amount. We also have the option of having a combined retirement, which includes having a retirement in soles plus an annuity, a lifelong annuity in soles. Nobody has gone that way. Nobody opted for this option. We thought that having active decisions, we would have more people joining this model, but no, very few.
Well, thank you very much for your attention, and I thank for the speakers for their excellent exposition. Thank you very much. invite everyone to take a seat. We will begin. We have 15 minutes late from the original agenda. This is our fourth and last session, with a session which closes our day with an interesting discussion for transfer information, a session about the global panorama of the pensions in the AOS countries, main challenges, recent reforms, and improvement proposals. The moderator is Miss Solange Bernstein, which we had the pleasure to listen at morning with the launch of the Plaque Network. And as speakers, we welcome Mr. Osvaldo Macias, Pension Superintendent from Chile, Alvaro Ramos Chavez, Pension Superintendent of Costa Rica, and Carlos Ramirez Fuentes, President of the Retirement Savings System from Mexico. Good afternoon. The panel for the end of our long journey, we will ask the speakers to be very enthusiastic. We'll talk about the main challenges, some conclusions about the day for the pension systems, some of the recent reforms for each countries, and proposals for the future. Therefore, we have Osvaldo Macias, Pension Superintendent from Chile, which will begin with his presentation. Each speaker will have approximately 15-20 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer round.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank Central Bank for giving us the opportunity of being present here today. In the case of Chile, the pension system started in the year 81 and had gone through several reforms during its existence. However, the last big reform was done in 2008, and that is basically the one that I'm going to be talking about. What was its content and the main results. And I would also like to indicate that after 8 years of such modification, we have already talking about a great change in our system, which is the second feature that I'm going to be discussing. After 2008 reform, our pension system has been integrated with the Solidarity Foundation, addressed to the most sensitive part of our population. And finally, we have a third foundation that is financed with the contribution of individuals, with tax encouragement and subsidiary programs from the state. The idea is to smooth the consumption through these capitalization foundings, mandatory and voluntary, and also the idea is to reduce the poverty, to alleviate poverty. Which were the main objectives in order to evaluate whether they were met or not? Increase the level of coverage of the system through the solidarity dimension, to increase the level and quality through the mandatory contributory pillar, improve the quality of the coverage already foreseen through the voluntary column, make sure equity was offered because women were prejudiced compared to men, increase the competence. The PFAs were not they were competing with prices, and the decisions were made according to their rates, the commissions that they have. improve the participation levels, the education to the population, and improve the institution, and improve the institutions involved in the system of institutions involved. Going into further detail, the content of this change to our system of pensions. The column number 1, or pillar number 1, is formed by a basic solidarity pension for those that are not affiliated or not contributing to the pension system. This is a complement for pensions that are financed, auto-financed, but do not reach a certain level. And this is concentrated in the 60% of the most vulnerable population. It was also important to have a mandatory contribution for dependent workers that wasn't mandatory so far, also aiming at gender equity, establishing a bonus, also available for women that was until that moment not perceived by women. And then we applied a profitable rate, and women were receiving a check in their individual accounts with this bonus. In order to attack the difference in prices, we established a system of having new affiliates. They were assigned to the PFA for a period of 2 years, and in the corresponding call for bids, they were able to select the different PFAs. We also have an insurance to cover disabilities, which was also managed by the PFAs. This disability or invalidity insurance was then offered by a private company, a contract was signed, and the PFAs were the ones responsible, according with charge to their commissions, to collect these monies and then pay the corresponding insurance company. So the PFAs ended up working as insurance companies. It was more profitable to absorb, to have affiliates that would represent a low risk for disability or invalidities. We wanted to correct that margin, and the PFAs, as I said, they were working as insurance companies but without having a backup fund. So they were running a huge risk. We wanted to correct that situation, and that's why we separated the invalidity insurance that the PFA would charge. They simply now participate as a tender participant, and they have to consider the whole universe of insurance companies and select the one that charges the lower service, and then the insurance company will be wholly responsible, wholly liable for any risks involved in that operation. So the PFAs would then receive the monies from the insurance companies, and all the liability will then reside in the insurance company, which is the right model to have. Among other things, the commissions would only finance what they have to finance, not the disability insurance, and we eliminate a fixed rate contribution. This was addressed for people that have lower incomes. The rest of the PFAs did not go under any other major changes. We have, of course, some restrictions pursuant to law, and there was not enough flexibility for further modifications at that time. Then a committee was formed with 5 experts in this subject: the President of the Republic, 2 scholars of the economic and law universities, and then a member of the executive power. all of these were members and technicians on the subject matter. So this also enabled us to provide more flexibility to the system compared to what they had before. So the idea was to help, of course, mainly our retired population, and also to provide proper counseling for those that were about to retire. The main results, I will show them to you. These are the result of the Solidarity Pillar.
Que se estaban pagando.
These are the results that were paid. We were paying about 600,000 of solidarity pensions, with an extra pension system for those with an extra amount was paid for those that were not reaching the minimum levels to receive a retirement, like a compensation. In the case of disability, this was represented 48% of the solidarity pensions. So they added up to these figures. If we see this from a cost perspective regarding the contribution for pension funds, you can see that with this solidarity payment, we have an APS of invalidity. What does it mean regarding public expenses? Back in 2015, we spent 0.5% of GDP in this reform. Of course, it is very important to have this solidarity system. If you see the replacement rates, more importantly with vulnerable women, this particular group, this introduction was very, very positive. All measures, all figures have shown that result. A second aspect was the fact that we had 4 call for bids during the year, and the commission was dropped by 70%. The first commission was 1.36%, and it continued to systematically go down until the one that we saw last year, reaching 0.41 of each one of the workers affiliated, 0.41 of their income, their salaries. And thanks for that. After that, we also have a new PFA coming into the market. It is difficult for people to move from one another. People usually adhere and stay to the PFA they choose. And we have a 23% of affiliates that were benefited from this from this drop down in the commissions of the PFAs. The independent contributions were also made compulsory, and this came into force this year. So at the beginning, we thought that this measure, at the beginning, as you showed earlier on in this morning, people say, no, I don't want to contribute. So on average, only 27% of the independent workers were contributing after this measure. And last year, we had a law that postponed for 4 more years the fact that the contribution was mandatory. The first tender, the first call for bids, in the first call for bids, we still have a very high price for the SIS. And as you can see, there is still a difference for the prime in women and men. So we still charge the higher price between men and women, but the difference of the premium will go to the particular accounts, female or male, depending on on the case. Women have less accidents, so that's why they receive more money. About 100,000 people, women have received this bonus. And even if women that have babies, even though they will contribute for half of the time during their work life, they will still receive a benefit after this regulation.
The whole Solidarity Pillar was a huge contribution. The number of affiliated increased. A new commission was created in 2014, integrated by 24 members who had to evaluate the states of the system, independent issues. This commission delivered its report in 2015 and identified the issue that the coverage should increase, that although the older contributors were not receiving good pensions, there is a low confidence in the system and low levels of financial and pension knowledge. The Commission had three proposals. The proposal A was to keep the multi-pillar system to improve some of them. The proposal B replaces the system by another system, and proposal C increases the citizenship participation and there were 58 specific proposals which were to increase the system and strengthen the contributory pillar and to increase savings. In letter A, there was a consensus to increase the coverage for the most vulnerable part of the population and to increase the solidarity contribution in 20%. In the letter C, 0.56, to increase savings by contributions and to increase the contribution to 4% by the employer, and a part of this 4% would go to a solidarity fund to strengthen the solidarity system, and other 2% would go to the individual account of each person. Letter D, to increase the retirement age and to equalize the retirement age for men and women, to increase the age to 65 or more. And at last, to finish it, because I think looks like it is important, letter F, to incentivize competence in the management of individual accounts, to extend the actual legislation to all the affiliated with a mechanism to be defined. Today there is a ministry commission to discuss this issue and should deliver to the president in the next months a report with proposals to change the legislation. To finish, in 2008 reform, some aspects of the system have changed, but there are pending issues and challenges. Policy designers and experts have prepared a diagnosis on the pension systems, and the government is currently working to find a better way to face those challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Osvaldo, for your very interesting presentation about the evolution over the last years in the Chilean system. Now Alvaro will share his experience for Costa Rica and how they have advanced.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Now I'm going to concentrate more on the strategies or the general orientation that we will have in Costa Rica. What are the main challenges that we are facing? Very similar to the ones already expressed, the low performance and the low profitability. But we also have other challenges, the risk management. We come from a tradition of risk management supervision because we had to fulfill requirements. I always give the example that our questionnaire that has more than 400 questions, sometimes I ask myself, why 400%? And sometimes I was told, well, we started with a little bit of questions, and then since people started to learn how to answer and say yes to all of the answers, the next year we would add more questions to be able to identify. And that's how it ended up in a 400 questionnaire. Basically, the way that I envision the risk management supervision is that once you have identified a risk, you write about it and you identify it in comparison with the other silly system that we were using with the questionnaire. Costs. Naturally, in the presentations that we have seen yesterday, we saw that the costs for Latin America and in Costa Rica in particular are high and above in comparison with the developed countries. So that's a challenge that we have to face. Diversification. In my country, we have this diversification problem that I commented earlier on, by which the local stock markets do not allow us to have a huge diversity. So if you want to diversify, you have to resource to abroad. So the challenge that we used to have was that the scale for Costa Rica, in order to reach out, it implied a lot of high cost in order to be able to participate in stock markets or to have participants abroad. That was very expensive. And there was also an attitude that we have to evaluate. Well, if it's not suitable for me because I have higher costs involved, then I won't do anything. But even though at the beginning, the first years, the scale to be able to have presence abroad was little, now our pension fund scale has a system that enables us to have 35% of the GDP is dedicated to the fund pensions. And that enables us to have, of course, we have due dates. Imagine that this was distributed and every year we have to reallocate more than 10% of GDP. So depending on how quickly this assignment is managed, we can also generate a macroeconomic unbalance, which we have already experienced. So there was a rate of exchange, there was an impact on the rate of exchange. So from the regulation, we have to be able to also attend to this systemic scale and its capacity, and the capacity it has of moving flows that may make the financial system, become unstable. It is important to point out that we have compulsory plans that are developed according to plan, but the voluntary plans is very, very small. This reflects a scarce financial education. I only save if I am obliged to save. I don't have any willing to do so. So looking at this, how can we have an approach from the regulation? Because we are not the co-administrator. We are the regulator body. So what is the space we have from the intendancy to face all these challenges? We defined 3 main objectives last year: to monitor, to surveil, to strengthen, and to empower. The first is then to surveil or monitor the participants in this national system of pensions. That is the primary function, because of course we can talk about everything else, but if they have stolen the money, then we don't have any further topics to discuss. So first of all, we have to protect the assets in order to be able to transfer it to the different accounts. But a poor management would be translated into unnecessary commissions through multiple transactions, which is already happening with cell operators. They do a lot of transfer operations that at the beginning you may not understand, but then you realize that the financial groups are commissioning through unnecessary transfer operations, transactions, only to generate commissions. So the idea is to strengthen this, because at the beginning they only see the private part in Costa Rica, but you have to control the whole body, including the whole body. And sometimes we have a lot of deficiencies in the structure in our pension system when it comes to solvency. And finally, give more power or empowering our affiliates.
As I said, we must remember the state has taken the decision from the first and second pillars to obligate the person to receive a part of its earnings. We have the responsibility to protect this contribution until the person retires. One of the main reforms was to move forward a supervisory model. We talk about model as something abstract. But we are talking about specific reforms. Supervision model based on risk, the regulation for investments, and a reduction of investment costs of the previsional system. We know you are facing all these challenges, how to make the funds in Costa Rica and around the world. We have to know how to analyze these regulations, and particularly to associate it to the risk-based supervision, because we have two risks in Costa Rica: the informational and the operational one. If you have asset needs, we have in Costa Rica to connect all the risks, all the problems that will generate assets needs. These are the main measures we have to take in the reform. And finally, the cost part, which it's related to the elements that come from the last great reform from the pension model in Costa Rica 15 years ago, which created superintendents. This was a political negotiation which generated unnecessary costs based on money, because it had to meet some of the interests in the moment, but they are not generating value added. In order to strengthen the model, we have to propose. We are not the managers, the administrators. We have the one who has the liability of strengthening the fund is the administrator, which has to strengthen the fund, not the regulator. But what we have to do is to be an instrument of national dialogue with these funds, because in many cases there is some problems with these funds, and some of the greatest funds in Costa Rica are already taking serious measures to tackle these solvency problems. But we have to take this to the population, because it's not the same that the administration tells ABC, but the population has to accept it, because sometimes it goes through the Congress. And you know how it is, the Congresses are. A camel goes in and a horse goes out.
Depending on the way that this unemployment fund was defined in Costa Rica is something that is very particular, and something that we would like to revisit. Sometimes you don't know what to expect from your audience. Some time ago I tried to introduce this topic about this relief fund, and it had a huge impact, and I received a negative answer and surprise faces. So of course not everybody interprets the topic in the same way. The problem is that the unemployment relief as we have today, you can withdraw it every 5 years, provided there is a continuity in your work life for over time. So what happens if you're unemployed and you withdraw all the money, and in a couple of months you have no money left? You spend it all. It doesn't make any sense to have then a relief fund. So we need to come up with new proposals and new ideas that maybe currently are not accepted. So that's why we have to empower our affiliates for them to be able to master the products. Today we still have some inconvenience. One of them is that the regulations in force does not prevent operators to steal affiliates from each other. So these companies have a huge marketing and sales department and a very tiny investment department, because they are not interested in competing in that sense. They only want to steal each other's affiliates. So they have not developed more sophisticated ways of investment. So this is something that really worries me. Instead of telling people, I have these excellent investment strategies, I am giving you different speeches. The second problem is to have authorized products, not to have an approach of just delivering something that is profitable. We would like to be able to provide a service plus a profitability package as a whole package. But today, in theory, you know with how much you're going to be retiring in theory, because you have to travel around so many institutions, right, to know how much you're going to be entitled to, depending on the different operators. Since we have a multi-pillar system, you may receive different sources of pension, but we want to consolidate all the possible pensions in only one profile. So for you, just for people to be able to enter in one place, only enter one place and be able to have access to this information. This is a project that we have for the next 3 years. Some other countries have already moved forward and advanced in this sense. And another issue is the concern about the lack of willingness to or desire to be informed about the affiliate situation. So we want to be able to have some power, to give some power to people to know that if they change a little bit and you contribute voluntary, and if you want to have a positive contribution, you have to undergo a whole process to have this positive. We want to invert this. We want you to automatically contribute 1 or 2% to your voluntary, and then you have to make a decision of not being part of it anymore. You can, of course, contribute 0, but you must make the decision of contributing 0. So we are pushing them, we are pushing towards a positive contribution, and then in which, of course, they have to take the decision of reducing that. And you know that if you push people enough to contribute positively, they will realize why they have to do so.
Thank you, Alvaro, for this interesting presentation. Great, thank you. Now we have Mr. Carlos Ramirez, which will tell us about the progresses and challenges for the Mexican case. Thanks, Solange. I have the bad luck to be the last speaker, even though although the conversation will have an end. I will be brief regarding the Mexican case. In this occasion, talk more than the Mexican case itself and the issues we have progressed move forward in the last years. We want to talk about the results of a study made by OECD last year, which was presented by the General Secretary of OECD in Mexico with the Secretary of Economy in Mexico. A deep study on the Mexican pension system, and some guidelines were identified to strengthen it. We also requested the OECD to make this study, which was necessary. There are third party made a complete evaluation about our pension system, and there are third party that could have the best technical background to help us in our case as regulators to foster the agenda of improvements in the country. I wish to highlight my colleagues could join me in this opinion, but many times regulators are alone in the face of evidence that changes should be made, but in the economic and political context, that's not always favorable. I'm not talking about the Union's Congress, but of the economic authorities and the banks, which sometimes see the pension reform as something that not necessarily can be shared in those particular moments of the country. With this study, the aim was to foster a wide agenda, what OECD has told us. Pablo Antolin is here, which is the author of this study. I would say that OECD's study was very important. Said some things we already knew, and other things that were necessary that a third party could tell us. But in the whole, there was a general study, a general diagnosis of the Mexican pension system.
And basically, these are the recommendations: improve the design of the system for public pensions, smooth the transitional process that we used to have. We have a particular and peculiar system of transition for our contributors, those having contributed before July 1997, they will still have a chance to retire according to the old system. We also wanted to improve the social welfare protection system for the elder, and also to improve the payment phase or stage. These are all recommendations in which each country may be reflected or identified with. Regarding the public systems for pensions, I think that the OECD in Mexico to talk about this, and I think that's something that happens in many countries in the world, not only in Latin America. In general, nobody wants to talk about distribution system because later on, politically, this is like a minefield, and in general, nobody wants to talk about that because in general, they carry in its design on the long term a lot of miscomfort, if you like, because we have to talk about a lot of issues in which the politicians today they won't be present when those bombs explode. In the case of Mexico, we have parametric reforms to increase the contribution of rates, guarantee the transfer of these systems, because nowadays it is very segmented. There is a lot of segmentation in federal schemes, in state schemes, in municipality schemes. So OECD, of course, suggested that we have to condition part of those transfers between the different schemes, because as we know, financially these are not feasible. But we also know that each one of these segmentations have no interest to introduce any reforms because of the financial costs associated to them. So what we say is these segments won't do it by their own, so we have to encourage them, make the circumstances, the situations easier for them to do so. This is a very innovative approach. As we explained, the transition generation before the 97 will be able to retire with an 80% replacement rate as an average, and they are very happy. That generation will be extended because nobody will be able to use those programs again because the replacement rate is very generous. And what OECD said, well, your reform in the year 1997 was short. It was a good one, but it ran short. So we need to make sure that we have a new scheme for our transitional generation, starting from the 1st of January 2017, they will be able to see in a pro-rate way, these are all the benefits that you have generated, these are your rights, and these are the rights that you're going to be generating in individual accounts, all of them. Naturally and politically, this is a very sensitive issue or matter or topic, but when we talk about equity, when we talk about future feasibility in terms of fairness as well for the intergenerational justice, I think this would be a measure that should be explored. Also recognizing that it is a controversial proposal in terms of policies. In Mexico, we have the elder people that are about 65 years old are below the line of poverty. We have a federal scheme. Solange already spoke about this. We also have some segments segmented by state. They do not work properly. They are not well integrated into the system. So the OECD proposes to follow the Chilean plan or scheme, which I think it's very sensible, because the Chilean model it's a very good one, and it's working very good, and it has brought some very positive results according to their reform back in 2008. So the segmentation of the system, the idea is to unify the different pieces of the puzzle. Of course, this implies a significant cost. This is not the task of the OECD to assume such cost. It has to be assumed by the government or by the state. Mexico has one of the lower contributions within the Latin American countries. I think that these figures summarize very clearly our problematic. This table shows the likelihood to have a replacement rate, and in order to obtain a replacement rate of 50%, you have to save 13% of your salary. That is only to have a 50%. Let's not talk about higher numbers. So this table that is under study, the study is available in our website, is about the reality of our contributions and our replacement rates, the future of our replacement rates not being changed in the near future.
I'm sorry, we have a problem here. There it is. Sorry. No, it doesn't go on. Sorry. The question to increase in the contribution, who pays it? Especially in a labor market which is very fragmented and segmented, where percentages of informality are high in the Latin American countries. It's not simple to say to increase the contributions, because there would have been secondary effects, that non-desirable ones. Therefore, we must link it to wage increases or payment of utilities, which is entitlement that workers have in Mexico. There are different models to explore. All these issues are already known. OECD has proposed the potential solutions to an increase in contribution, including independent workers, and OECD has not talked about the independent worker issue. It would be very important to question how to involve independent workers, because it hasn't worked in the countries it has been implemented. Then, talking about investment, Mexico has one of the most restrictive investment portfolios. Most of the portfolios are in debt with the country in the next 20 years. It recommends to implement a Chilean model. The disaccumulation of the annuity, which it's at its beginning, because it's not at the part of disaccumulation. And as a conclusion, this study will be a fundamental input into discussions on the future of the country's pension system. There are very clear guidelines that will provide to expand the options of reform. There are very punctual issues, but the study represents a very useful tool to think about necessary reforms in Mexico. Thank you very much.
much, Carlos. There is no doubt that these three countries are showing us important challenges. I would like to suggest a reflection. Let's see if we can get some additional conclusions. Being Chile, the country that has the older reform after 35 years, I'm still surprised about the low level of knowledge people have regarding their pension system and how the system works, what their pension rely on, what are the rates, the contribution rates in the system, etc. What is the role of the industry? What are the possible explanations, and what are the mechanisms that could be used in the future or eventually that have been used and were not useful in the case of Chile? Do you also find a similar situation in Mexico, in Costa Rica? What is the level of knowledge that people have about how the system works? And I think this is a relevant question when we are facing, Gonzalo was mentioning earlier on, to finance pensions will be very, very expensive. How do we raise awareness within the population, because they don't want to understand that?
Thank you, Solange. This is an excellent question. I can answer with the following. I don't know how much my contribution to the pension, but how is it possible? It's very simple. The system is made in such a way that it's impossible to know how much is the contribution, because in Costa Rica, for instance, currently the calculation form for the primary pillar for pensions corresponds only to the last 2 years of work, something that I would stay from 30 years of work. In theory, I would contribute to my primary pillar, but in the past, the primary pillar accounted with 5 years, then it's extended to about 20, and then extended to the whole working life. My contributions would have any value. That's why I'm in uncertainty situation, because in sometime they change the regulations for the primary pillar to include the whole working life, then my contributions will change radically. I believe these issues generate much uncertainty. Past decisions of public policies which were aimed towards a certain group of interest generated uncertainty for the average person regarding what is the contribution to their pension. This is a very punctual, specific case, not only for the young, but for the whole working age. How do you manage multiple systems? In my case, I belong to 2 different systems because I'm contributing to a teaching system, because I'm a professor, in addition to being superintendent. And any person who has more than one formal work, it's easily contributing to multiple systems, and to know how much is this contribution, how would this impact in the future, is almost impossible. That's why I'm saying about the importance to have a pension record, an element which was not present in the political discussion. I don't know where it came from, but in the worker protection laws, try to organize the percentages that were contributed for complementary reasons. Because when you read in the article, it says that you contribute 3% to such fund, but this fund receives 0.5%, and this will, some percentage will go to other funds, and you don't know how much which fund receives how much of the contribution. What you contribute is 4.5 as a complementary saving. But the other day I was reviewing the website of the superintendents and I haven't found it anywhere. I feel that sometimes for making some obscure because if you say it clearly that people will charge 4.5 for their complementary savings, the law wouldn't be enforced. Then I imagine they have made it a little clear to manage this situation. What I say that even if it's difficult for me, I imagine for the ordinary people. Thank you very much.
I will also answer this in a simpler way. We have a pre-annual survey to assess the level of knowledge people have about pension funds to introduce improvement, but the lack of knowledge is amazing. We have 15 million of Mexicans who are completely unaware of which PFA they are affiliated to. So that is to say, not even imagine how much they know about the rates or the calculations involved. So speaking about this issue for the next coming years, I think that there is a clear responsibility for the PFAs, but at the end of the day, it has to be the government, the one that takes control, either different measures in order to reinforce a more active process of communication. We also run surveys about the trust that people have on the different systems. And the results reflected not only the ignorance, but also the lack of interest that they have. They don't trust the system, basically. That's why they are not informed. So we have to make sure, Solange, there are many things that we are doing, but the reality is that in this particular fields, you can move forward very slowly, and you have to do these activities all together. I believe that this is a topic that was left behind in the agenda for the design of the pension systems. There was not really a concern about whether people would understand this. I remember the first brochures or letter that the PFA would send. It had like 4 pages. Nobody was able to decipherate them, to understand them. So if you ever have the chance to grab one of those communication brochures, you will see that they were impossible to understand. Nowadays we have a model that is very similar to the one that our friend from Mexico showed, that has been simplified. But we had to go through many changes in this brochure because we wanted to include everything there, but it's not possible to do that. Another case that I remember was about the retirement system, and it was very difficult for people to retire because basically nobody understood the pension options. There were many options available, many alternatives. So in the end, people were, when the time came to face retirement, they were not sure to determine which would be the best insurance company among the 10 or 12 available ones. And that simple question was impossible to answer. So such decisions were left in the hands of insurance companies. or Asian insurance brokers. So what we did was we introduced an electronic system for you to be able to retire, and at the end of the process, once we have all the steps clearly defined, we would then give information about each option of each individual company. That is a very good system.
Y también puede ser asesorado por
And of course, these private brokers would also be able to provide this information. But basically, people is very well protected now throughout the process. So I think we have been able to improve the transparency of this process. And how long did it take us to get there? A lot of years. We have not done a lot of effort in educating people. Just over the last few years, we have seen that. And we have a professor that was very committed to this, but he was so boring that only after listening to this professor for a few minutes, you would fall asleep. It was very, very difficult to follow. So nobody was able to learn with that professor. Do you remember him? Yes, I do. So the survey shows that people is not very aware and know very much about the system, but they do want to know. They want to learn about the system. So that is a light at the end of the tunnel. We have then the surveys that show these results, and we have to see this as an opportunity. The industry has reacted, and they have had campaigns throughout the different media, and they are working very much on this. And we are aware of this, and we will be facing this challenge and looking for solutions. I hope you also helped us in the process.
Thank you very much. I'll have to give bad news. It's not easy, but it's very expensive to manage pension funds. As Olga told earlier, brought a bad news to everyone who thought who would have better pensions. Sometimes we have to deliver this information, which is a very complex thing, so that this information is well interpreted. People would be amazed to know how much they will receive as a pension when they contributed their whole life. There are studies which assess the perception about the services, and people tend to think that this amount that is contributed will be equivalent to the pension, and think that this value will be much higher. That's the difference. People think they are rich, and when they get to know it, they can't believe it. This is a communicational issue. Therefore, this is a challenge for all the countries, especially in a low return scenario where the capitalization, the savings are low. What can we expect from the future return of the payment capacity of people in these systems? This seems to be a challenge regardless of the kind of system. We should make this a reflection because we are talking about Chile, with delivery piler, and the Costa Rica where there is a delivery piler. We are talking about good returns. How about this piler? And when they talk about people have to choose about this option, what is the result of that in the future? These are the challenges we are talking when regarding the low interest rates, which impact the payment capacity of these systems.
In the case of Mexico, the distribution pillar that prevails naturally has a fiscal cost that was proposed to be modified because the cost of the transition was a huge one. And back in 2017, after 2007, almost 10 years have gone by, and we can see that we will still have a huge impact. When we have the reform first introduced, workers were allowed the option to go with particular companies or move to private companies, to public companies, and only 40% remain in distribution. So the distribution has a lot of issues as well. There are no funds there, so they are not profitable. In the case of individual accounts, the average profit is about 6%, slightly below the profit, the performance that we have seen in other Latin American countries. We have to start talking about this in a clearer way. There are no analyses that have internalized this. And the flexibilization for the investment in Mexico, it's also of paramount importance. But even having the most flexible system in the world, as Chile may have, the challenge will be enormous. But I think we have to start preparing the investors, the calculators that Olga mentioned earlier on. We have a scheme of calculators. The parameters have to start, they must start to change in order to reflect this. If I understood correctly, the question has to do with the sustainability or the possibility of being able to actually pay what was promised. In fact, as Carlos has said, in the case of Costa Rica, since we have so many regimes that are important with the first pillar, the low rates is not something that has a lot of impact, because in Costa Rica, the reserves are small in comparison to the promised benefits. So you could double or multiply by 3 the amount, and you will still have not the possibility of pay as promised, even though they're multiplied by 5. So in the end, the adjustment process that we need to go through have to do with the benefits. But at least in Costa Rica, we have acquired rights or benefits, and it's very difficult because the Congress is able to pass some laws, but then we get stuck in other legal processes in order to be able to provide something sustainable in the long run. It has been very difficult for us to understand that the current process is not sustainable. In the case of distribution regimen, but in other regimes, the low rate will only last a little bit longer and not having a lot of effect, because most of capitalization regime are just getting mature. We still have to wait for 15, 20 years for them to be fully matured. So in the midterm, we will be able to evaluate whether we are able to recover this capacity, this payment capacity, as we have promised. That's why the previous presentation was focused on possible low rates on the very long term. Because if we will never have high rates again, then we have to sit and rethink what we're going to do. That will be a problem throughout the world, not only for Costa Rica.
In our case, there are 2 contributions by each retired. This make the solution impossible because population is aging and it's more difficult to support the aging in the retired population. I think we have to work more in a special way. There are no magical solutions. To saying that is complex. It's not easy to say it by the public opinion, but I believe we have to work more and harder to have better pensions. If the interest rates increase in the years, we will begin thinking again in a better future for the pensions. But the problem is more complex with low interest rates and increasing inflations, and systems have to be competitive, and to adjust expectations is not easy. Any other questions? I think we have time to one question. If anyone has a question. Pablo? This is a question for Osvaldo. From the 52 proposals to increase the solidarity pillar, my question is, who will pay that? With the budget or related to increase the contribution by 4%, divided between the employers and the employee, which will pay with the solidarity fund? Yes, as the proposal says, from the 24 members of the commission, part of the increase, this 4%, is part of a solidarity fund to fund this amount, and the other one is aimed at the national budget, the taxes. This is the proposal. Well, thank you very much. We are around the 6 o'clock. We will close this panel. We'll have a round of applause to the speakers. Well, I will speak briefly. I would like to, first of all, to congratulate the organizers of this seminar. I believe it was a successful, it approached issues of great interest for everyone. We had the participation of very important speakers from all the contexts. I believe the objective was accomplished by the technical commission by Chile, in Mexico and Uruguay, who contributed to development of the seminar. In representation of the member countries, I would like to thank for our participation to Uruguay for hosting this important event, and naturally our assembly And I wish to invite you to the next year where we will have an event jointly with the Association regarding issues of disaccumulation stage. This event will be hosted by Chile in next year. I'd like to invite you to this event next year. And thank you, everyone. Thanks, Juan Pedro, for your support and development of this event.
Thank you very much, Carlos. For us, it has been a true pleasure to welcome you and to have this seminar, which has had a very high level, and it has been a pleasure to receive each one of the speakers and the participants. We have had the participation of organizations, of multilateral organizations, international organisms, and I want to also highlight Pablo and his presentations. He's always accompanying us and sharing with us all the accumulated knowledge he has in the OECD. I would also like to thank the different organizations that are present here, some companies that have been working in order to support different IAOs projects, who have clearly enabled us to have a higher level of understanding in such difficult and complex matters that is going to increasingly difficulty. The president of Central Bank mentioned at the initiation of this day that it was important to share the general visions and the general challenges relevant to each region in order to understand and to learn from other experiences. So I hope you have been able to enjoy some of your free time in our city. We hope you can make the most of it. And I would like to give my special thanks to Vivian. She's the IOS secretary who has been behind this for a long time. Alejandro as well, thank you. Alejandro Labaña, Alejandra Puglia, and Rosario Varela from the superintendency, who always also be behind all the logistics, which are so important for us to be able to have a successful event. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your knowledge and for being so supportive in this instance. And I also want to congratulate Carlos, because throughout his presidency we have been able to develop different works in order to share different presentations. So again, let's return home with success and enjoy the rest of your time here. Thank you very much.